Hi Year 9, today's title is Genetic Diagrams and Sex. Today is the 20th of April 2020, and in today's lesson we are learning to use Punnett squares, which are a type of genetic diagram, to determine inherited sex of human offspring. Now, if you're a bit confused about Punnett squares genetic diagrams, or you've forgotten a little bit of what we did just before Easter, I advise you to go back and look at the last video on genetic diagrams before you start, just to help. Let's remind ourselves what genetic diagrams are. Genetic diagrams are diagrams which can be used to predict how different characteristics are inherited. So the characteristics from your mother and your father, and we can use a Punnett square, for example, or a monohybrid cross to see how the offspring's phenotypes would be impacted. We can also use genetic diagrams to determine sex in human beings. So what do I mean by sex? I'm talking about whether you're male or whether you're female. So we can actually use a genetic diagram to determine the sex of a baby. Remember, humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, so 46 altogether. 23 pairs, so you're multiplying that by 2. We're talking about diploid cells here. So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Here are some chromosomes. Remember, they don't actually look like this. This is just them neatly lined up for us. And the first 22 chromosomes, we say that we label them 1 to 22, and they contain the genes that determine inherited characteristics, that is your hair type, your earwax type, things like that. That last pair of chromosomes, however, the 23rd pair, we label them X and Y, or X or Y, sorry. And these are our sex chromosomes. So the 23rd pair of chromosomes are sex chromosomes. And our sex chromosomes actually look different whether we are male or female. So let's take a look at the female sex chromosomes. So here they are again. Remember, they're not neatly lined up like this, just for us to see. Chromosome pairs 1 through 22, we're talking about inherited characteristics. That 23rd pair is our sex chromosomes. And in a female, the sex chromosomes are the same, XX. You need to remember that. In a male, however, the sex chromosomes are different. They are labelled X and Y, and you can see that they actually look different. And remember, these are the chromosomes in normal bodily cells. But when we talk about inheriting things, we're not interested in normal bodily cells, because when a baby is formed, when the egg and sperm fuse together to form a zygote, we're talking about gametes. Egg and sperm cells are gametes, and they are haploid. They're not diploid, they're haploid cells. So we haven't got an X and X in the egg cell. In fact, in the female egg cell, you would only ever have an X. So remember that XX exists in diploid cells. Now we're talking about gametes, we're talking about haploid cells. The egg cell would only ever contain an X chromosome. The male sperm cell, that's a bit different now, because here in a male cell, we've got X and Y. In a diploid male cell, normal human bodily cell, the sex chromosomes, X and Y. But remember, when we talk about gametes, we're talking about haploid. So in a sperm cell, you would either have an X chromosome or you would have a Y chromosome. I would pause and just let you absorb that information. I would rewind, maybe go through it again. So we're talking about gametes now. So let's take a look at the Punnett square. So the Punnett square is going to help us. It's a genetic diagram, and it will help us to determine the sex of offspring. So we've got our mother and we've got our father here. Remember, the mother, a female, has the X and X chromosomes, and the father has an X and a Y chromosome. So let's transfer those gametes over to our Punnett square. Remember, this is a human cell up here, a human bodily cell, so it's diploid. In a Punnett square, we separate the diploid cell into gametes, haploid. So here on the side, I've got the mother, X and X, and on the top I'm going to put the father, X and Y. So remember, this represents one sperm cell. This represents one sperm cell. This represents one egg cell, and this another egg cell. So let's take a look at what would happen if this egg cell fused with this sperm cell. Well, we would have X and X. That offspring would inherit the X chromosome from the mother and inherit the X chromosome from the father. Overall, this offspring's genotype is XX. This offspring would be female. We know that the female contains the same sex chromosomes. Okay, let's take a look over here. What would happen if this egg cell is fused with this sperm cell, this Y containing, or this sperm cell containing the Y chromosome? X and Y. That offspring has inherited the X chromosome from the mother and the Y chromosome from the father. We know that males have different sex chromosomes, X and Y. So this particular offspring would actually be male. Alright, now let's take a look here, bottom left. X chromosome from the mother, X chromosome from the father, XX, there would be female. And the last box, XY. So the Punnett square shows the probability. Remember, we're talking about chance here. The probability of the sex of the offspring. And what we can tell from our Punnett square is actually there's a 50% chance of the offspring being female and a 50% chance of the offspring being male. But remember, we're talking about probability, we're talking about chance. Some of you may see this in your own families. It doesn't mean that if your mum and dad have 4 kids, that 2 of them will be male and 2 of them would be female. A mother could give birth to 4 sons. So it's really important to remember that we're just talking about probability, we're talking about chance here. And that's the end of today's lesson.